Hello, everybody. Welcome to the ZSB podcast. I'm Nathan Liu, and today our guest is Amanda Kukich. Could you introduce yourself, Amanda?
Yes, my name is Amanda Kukich, and I am the finance director for Advent Health within the Central Florida region, and I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And so, first question, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I went to Thunderbird Academy. Spent my entire elementary school there, high school, and until I went to La Sierra.
Nice. And why did you choose La Sierra? Is it because you went to Thunderbird?
So I was actually going to go to Southern. I had put my dorm deposit down and was entirely ready to move all the way to Tennessee and go to Southern. And it was actually the night or like a couple days before I had graduated high school that I completely changed my mind. And I realized that number one, La Sierra was a lot closer to Arizona. And I had had some friends with older siblings who had been there and said a lot of really great things about their business school and just about the experience in Southern California. And so the very last minute, I changed my mind, and I had really no friends that were going with me to La Sierra. So I felt like this was kind of the best place to start new. And it was still close enough to home, and I was still able to kind of get an entirely new experience as opposed to going somewhere where I know a lot of the same people, and just a change of scenery.
Nice. And were you always interested in accounting and finance?
I was. I have always been much better at math than I have been at any other subject in school. When even from the time I was in elementary school, I was the dork who was actually helping like your third and your fourth graders learn how to do multiplication because that was my favorite subject in school. And so I knew that I always wanted to do something related to that. And when I was in high school, I had just kind of started thinking about, well, even when I was little, what did I want to do when I grew up? My first answer was always, I want to be a businesswoman. And that was like me in preschool. And so it just kind of continued as I liked to do math. And as I was coming into college and deciding what my major was going to be, it just felt like business was the natural path. And then for me, correlating some of the numbers was the accounting and finance piece and being able to learn more of a tangible skill that I figured, okay, if I have this at least as my foundation, I can do anything else. I can do anything in business, and I will have had the baseline knowledge of accounting and finance that will be relevant even if I am an accountant or am not an accountant. It would still be beneficial to have in whatever career I took after college. So I just started that right after actually right into my freshman year, and I never stopped. And I'm still doing it today.
Nice. Yeah, sounds like you had quite the plan straight from the get-go.
Yes, from being a businesswoman to here we are today.
And so you did a internship at Kettering Health Network while you were still at La Sierra. Did you learn any invaluable skills?
I did. It was really there that I figured out that healthcare finance was where I wanted to be. And it was kind of figuring out my sweet spot of, you until you leave school, that's when you get to really figure out how you're applying what you learned in school, right? So when you're in an accounting class, you learn about your very basic accounting functions of debits and credits, but it's not until you take whatever job you're going to be that you actually figure out that, well, I'm going to be debiting or crediting different things than I would be in a different industry. And it was there that I got to see how finance applied in healthcare. and kind of all along knowing that I was never going to be a doctor, I was never going to be a nurse, but this would be my way of kind of helping in my skill set. And I think there I really learned the art of being able to connect my people skills with my technical accounting and finance knowledge. That was kind of the very, very technical part of my brain that involved math, and being able to see how I could apply that in different spaces that those who weren't as familiar with those technicalities, and kind of connect the dots. So it was like you got to explain the finance piece to nurses and to physicians who they never focused on that, right? That's just not what they went to school or what they trained to be professionally. And so I think I really learned that in that internship, as far as how you connect those dots for people with what you've learned as your own technical profession, and kind of being able to help teach that to other people. And that internship really gave me that opportunity to do so, as well as the networking piece. I mean, you kind of get that pounded in you as you're going through college, like network, and then you're like, why do I have to keep talking to all these different people? I already know enough people. And the funny thing is those mentors that I had there, I still communicate with. I mean, we still call each other, we still text each other, we're still relevant in each other's spaces. And I mean, really, you kind of begin to recognize, well, as long as you and I are in the same industry, I'll probably know of what you're doing for the rest of my career, and you will know the same for me. And so you kind of begin to actually see the value that you hear people talking about, once you start that first internship or once you take that first job.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you are now the director of finance at Advent Health.
Mhm.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
And what kind of responsibilities do you have now that you're in like this higher position?
So I report directly to our regional CFO. So we do everything from your technical accounting piece to overseeing the close process. So every time you close a month, you kind of take an evaluation of what was my actual expenses and revenue, and how did that compare to the budget that I planned for myself. And so my responsibility and role in that is being able to consolidate that information across all of our facilities and hospitals, and work with their finance teams, on understanding the story that happened each month. So if I'm assessing volume, I'm asking questions like, okay, if we had really strong revenue this month, well, what caused that? So did we have a good surgery month? Or if we missed budget on surgery, well, what happened? Were certain doctors out on vacation? Because that could very well be the explanation. And so essentially, I'm taking in this knowledge and working with my kind of colleagues to figure out what happened, and then putting together, our general story of here's what happened for the month, and providing that to our leadership in our divisional CFOs, and those above us to provide that story. So that's one piece. The other piece is helping in planning for the actual budget for the next year. So we're constantly either thinking about what's currently happening or planning for what is going to come. And that's part of the budget process. The other large component of what I do is capital spending. So essentially, dollars that we earn based off of the money that we make as a hospital. And then we take a percentage of that and we say, well, here's kind of our bank of dollars to spend, right? So just as you would have your own personal budget of kind of big items that you know you either want or you either need, we have the same concept at the hospitals. And so I oversee how we allocate those dollars. And so if I kind of have the bank of money, I get to work with all the hospitals, and they get to say, well, Amanda, here's what I need to spend money on, whether it's a more strategic goal, like we're going to build a new hospital because we want to capture more market share. That is part of that process. Or it's something as small as Hey, Amanda, we're blowing up with surgery volume and I need the surgical carts that get pushed through the space. I need one more of that. And that might cost a couple $1,000s. So you kind of go anywhere from a couple $1,000s to hundreds of millions of dollars of spending. And anywhere in between in that tracking and how we give that money out is part of what I get to oversee. And then obviously as COVID has hit, that has completely evolved all the things of what I thought my normal job would have ever been. So
Yeah, and going into that, how has
yeah.
COVID affected your guys' workplace?
Um, it has obviously affected our workplace substantially. So just from a basic workspace, we moved at least all of our kind of cubicle type space and some of those spaces where we have larger teams to work remotely. So that began back in March of last year. And through that process, we kind of tried to move, at least where we had massive groups of people in one space, move those folks home. And for those who either have offices or are able to kind of socially distance, then we just do that. And we have our masks, we have our temperature monitoring the moment you enter the building. So just from a logistics standpoint, that's how that changed. As far as my job, back in March, I went from really heavily finance focused to then I remember I was leaving to go home and my boss calls me and he's like, Amanda, where are you? I was like, well, I'm on my way home. And he was like, come back and meet me at he gave me the office number and I show up and suddenly I'm a part of a COVID task force where him and I are representative of the finance and working with our chief supply chain officer. And then at that time, we had a designated COVID CEO. So he was actually a CEO at one of our hospitals. And as his new temporary job, which we all kind of took on temporary jobs, he became our COVID CEO. And we kind of created this COVID command center where we were making finance and supply chain decisions for the entire company. So, as you may or may not know, we expand beyond Florida. We have Advent Health facilities in Colorado, in Illinois, and Texas, several other locations. And so we began making decisions and purchases and kind of rapid fire choices in the moment. And so we had this kind of group of individuals that were comprised of myself and my CFO from a finance standpoint, our chief supply chain officer, our pharmacy and lab lead. So he was really focused on getting the tests out and the turnaround times. And we were the ones who were literally calling for PPE. And so trying to figure out how much did we have left of N95s in the entire company? What were our days on hand? How could we easily pull that information? Because it's really not until this crisis hit that we're like, well, where are gaps in actual data and knowledge of what we have? And then how do we help fill those gaps? And so it was kind of like work that would have historically taken months to have achieved. Because of the sense of urgency, we did it in a matter of like weeks. And we put together these dashboards and data of, okay, at this facility, we've got 10 days on hand of N95 masks or of gloves or of gowns or of these are your surgical or regular ear loop masks or your surgical masks, which I learned all about your different kinds of things that I would have never known prior to taking this on. And you're literally calling people or getting phone calls from people saying, hey, I've got this amount of N95 masks. And then you've got to validate that they're real. And so from my job entirely changed into, and everyone's did, into focusing on the current need and the current state of the world and how is that going to impact us? And then how do we then project and how do we anticipate what's going to happen? Because as everyone knows, we had no idea and we still have no idea. And so that was an all-encompassing kind of role throughout the summer of last year, and then starting to then come into, well, how do we go from this crisis mode to, well, we've got to go on with our business. And so that then evolved into back kind of taking on half the COVID role and half, well, I still have a job to do here that's got to keep running. And then figuring out that really your new job has become both. And you've got to think about COVID in all aspects of your normal job, quote unquote. So that's the long answer to that question.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot, and especially it could get really overwhelming.
It can get exceptionally overwhelming, but it is exciting. It's exciting and very rewarding work to do, and to see when you've got some good wins, and when you know that at the end of the day, what you're doing is protecting the people who are protecting those who can't help themselves, and that knowing that that's what you're ultimately doing makes the stress of that really worth it.
Yeah, and then are those the main motivating factors for you during these times right now?
Absolutely. I mean, getting to kind of talk to a lot of my nurse leaders. So we've got chief nursing officers at every single facility. And I get to work a lot with our regional chief nursing officer, and getting to hear kind of like what I do. You think that everything is siloed, right? But it's really not. So I'm in finance, but I'm not in this finance box. My title is finance, but really it means nothing, because I've got to support nurses. I've got to support supply chain. I've got to support just all these different factors that you just didn't think about because you're like, well, I'm in finance. And you really begin to realize that, when you hear people say that's not my job, that gets blown out of the window, because this is technically your title, but it means nothing, because your job is to help all of those things keep going and stay financially viable. And that doesn't stay in just finance, because if you just stay in your finance corner, you're not helping anyone. And so getting to see how you fit in kind of goes back to my lessons that I learned in my internship, and then getting to see that here, but on a totally different level, is very rewarding.
Nice. And then we don't know. Hopefully, we will be done with this by the time that 5 years is here. But what are the next
Here's to hoping.
what do the next 5 years look like for you? Do you think?
That's a really great question. As of right now, I love the finance work that I get to do and how that overlays into operations. And kind of the trajectory for myself. I would love to be a CFO at one of our campuses, and to be able to kind of provide that support in our company. I would absolutely love that, and continue to work in finance, and to continue to be able to partner with those who are working on your frontline staff and combine that with my finance knowledge. So we'll see. Honestly, you really just don't know, but ideally I would love to be able to be a CFO at one of our campuses.
Hopefully, you get it.
Thank you.
And would you say there's a person that has had the biggest impact on you thus far in life?
That's a tough question, because that I kind of think varies professionally and personally. I would say personally, it would um, probably be my dad. He's been kind of my sounding board throughout helping me decide accounting in my major, and almost kicking me into healthcare. So back when I was in high school, as you are not so familiar with, but being a 14-year-old girl, you typically have some attitude. And I came home one day and my dad said, well, I signed you up to volunteer in a hospital. And he was like, that's how we'll fix the attitude. You'll have to learn how to be good to people here. And I was like, you did what? And he was like, oh, you heard me. I made you a resume, and now you're going to volunteer at a hospital. And I was 14, and I volunteered at the surgery waiting desk at a hospital in Arizona. And my co-volunteers were in their late 60s and 70s. So I was just the oddball out by nature. And I had to learn how to kind of do this. And that was my first integration with healthcare. And so I'd say he kind of kicked me into these different spaces that helped me grow, and was it's a little scary, but it helps you kind of learn your place, and has kind of been my sounding board throughout my career so far. And um, just from a constant support professionally, I would say when I first moved to Florida, I was assigned a mentor, and my mentor was a finance leader here in our company, and then she's now one of our regional CEOs, and she has been um, just great in serving as both a mentor and an advocate, because I think you need that support from, whether it's a close personal friend, like I said, like a personal person who impacts you, but you also need that advocate who can speak for your work when you're not in the room, and who can kind of help say, you know, I know Amanda does good work, and let's put her in this role and let her grow, or let her do whatever. And so she has been pivotal in my professional career. And she's someone who, we have very similar personalities, so is able to kind of show me, and she's been in this way longer than I have, so she can kind of show me, here are the things I did when I was your age that I should have done better. So some lessons to learn and to be better with. And so that's been very helpful in my current role, and in just making decisions and being smarter about how you make those decisions.
Mm, that's great. And then final question for you. Do you have
Yeah.
any authors or content creators that you would recommend people check out?
Yeah. So I'm very guilty of not being able to actually read physical books. I have to listen to Audible, just because the time it takes to sit down. So I usually listen to them as I'm driving into work. And one that I really love is, I love Malcolm Gladwell, and I love his book, Talking to Strangers. So, as you may or may not have picked up on, I'm fairly extroverted. And how his the whole purpose of the book is to understand how you get interpreted from people, and how they interpret you and how you interpret them. And you might be having a verbal conversation with someone, but they might have totally digested it completely different than you thought you were coming across. And that level of knowledge between how two people interact is pivotal in your personal life, but it's so important in your professional life. And especially in a space now where we're doing all of this virtual communication, um, being able to effectively communicate to where you're saying the same thing that people are hearing is so different. And that, to me, understanding that, and understanding that people's backgrounds will impact how they interpret what you're saying, I think everyone needs to learn that. I mean, it's so important in actually being effective in your job. And I'm a full believer in that, and just understanding where people come from before you make blanket statements, before you just assume, is so critical. So that book for me has been a huge, I mean, I came to work, and then I told my boss, and he was like, I'm reading it too. And then we have a coffee shop in our building, and we went down there, and we were like, have you read this book? Everyone here needs to read this book. So it's been a very good one, as far as kind of teaching me and helping reinforce that at the end of the day, you can do whatever job, um, in whatever industry, but the common factor is people, and you've got to work with them, and you've got to work with them well. And I think that that's really helped in that communication and people aspect.
I'll definitely have to check that one out.
Yes, I
All right.
highly recommend.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Amanda, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you.